A generation that aged backward. At first, it sounded impossible. Aging only moves one way, forward. And yet, the data told a different story, one that refused to fit existing models. Researchers noticed it gradually, almost reluctantly. This was not a single dramatic reversal, not a miracle cohort that suddenly looked younger overnight. Instead, across a span of years, an entire generation began showing biological markers that suggested something deeply counterintuitive. They were aging more slowly than the generation before them. In some measures, they appeared to be regaining ground that had already been lost. The shift was subtle enough to dismiss at first, yet persistent enough that it could not be ignored. Early reports were cautious. Scientists questioned measurement error, sampling bias, and short-term fluctuation. No one wanted to overstate the finding. Aging is treated as a biological certainty, a one-directional process governed by entropy and time. Any suggestion of reversal triggers skepticism, and rightly so. But this was not about reversing wrinkles or restoring youth in a superficial sense. It was about internal markers, cellular stress, inflammation, metabolic resilience, shifting in ways that challenged long-held assumptions. These were not cosmetic changes. They were systemic, measurable, and resistant to easy dismissal. To understand why this mattered, we need to look at how aging is usually measured. Chronological age is crude. Biological age is inferred from patterns. How systems respond to stress, how quickly they recover, how much damage accumulates versus how much repair occurs. For decades, those patterns moved predictably downward with each successive generation. Decline came earlier, recovery slowed, and resilience thinned. Each cohort appeared to age faster than the one before it, until it didn't. What made this generation different was not access to revolutionary medicine or radical technology. There was no single intervention to point to, no breakthrough drug, no universal treatment. Instead, researchers found a convergence of subtle structural changes that altered how life unfolded day to day. Aging did not slow because something extraordinary was added. It slowed because several ordinary pressures were quietly removed. This generation lived differently, not by coordinated intention, but by circumstance. Work looked different. Roles were less rigid. Careers unfolded in stages rather than straight lines. Social norms shifted away from lifelong identity lock-in. Failure carried less finality. Restarting became acceptable. Lives were no longer defined by a single irreversible path. These changes seemed cultural, even economic, but they carried biological consequences. Biologically, this mattered more than anyone expected. Stress patterns softened, not because life was easier, but because it was less terminal. Decisions no longer felt irreversible. The nervous system responds differently to challenge when consequences are not absolute. Threat perception declines even when effort remains high. The body can tolerate strain when it knows strain will end. Chronic stress becomes episodic stress, and that distinction changes everything. Researchers began noticing that recovery cycles were more complete. Effort still existed, but it ended more often. People changed jobs, locations, identities. Chapters closed instead of dragging on indefinitely. That closure created biological signals the body had been missing for decades, signals that allowed full recovery rather than partial adaptation. Inflammatory markers declined compared to earlier generations at the same age. Sleep architecture improved, with deeper restorative phases returning more reliably. Stress hormones showed clearer daily rhythms instead of chronic elevation. The body, given clearer starts and stops, began behaving younger, not cosmetically but systemically. Systems designed to recover finally had permission to do so. This is where the idea of aging backward took shape, not because time reversed, but because accumulated strain decreased. Biological systems that had been locked into defensive modes slowly recalibrated. Repair mechanisms became more active. Damage still occurred, but it no longer outpaced recovery as quickly. Aging did not stop, but it slowed enough to look unfamiliar. The conflict emerged when scientists tried to explain this using traditional models. Genetics could not account for it. Nutrition alone was insufficient. Exercise patterns did not differ dramatically. Medical access explained only part of the shift. Something else was at play: something structural and psychological rather than purely biological. The answer pointed toward narrative flexibility. Previous generations often lived under rigid trajectories. Education led to one career. Careers define identity. Identity locked people into roles long after they stopped serving them. Stress accumulated not just from effort, but from the inability to exit. The body remained on alert because the story never resolved. Open loops persisted for decades. This generation exited more often. They left jobs, left cities, left relationships, restarted without the same level of stigma. Biologically, exits matter. They signal completion. They allow the nervous system to stand down fully instead of remaining partially activated for years. Closure is not just emotional, it is physiological. Over time, that difference compounded. Fewer unresolved roles meant fewer open loops. Fewer open loops meant lower baseline stress. Lower baseline stress meant more resources available for repair. Aging slowed, not because you've returned, but because erosion eased. The body spent less energy bracing and more energy maintaining. This created an uncomfortable implication. Aging might be less about time and more about trapped momentum. The longer systems stay locked into unresolved states, the faster decline accelerates. When those states resolve, even late, biology responds. Damage does not vanish, but repair regains ground. The generation did not discover a fountain of youth. They discovered permission to change. That permission reshaped how biology interpreted life. Stress became episodic instead of permanent. Recovery became possible instead of theoretical. The body responded accordingly, reallocating energy from defense to maintenance, from survival to repair. The climax of this story lies in what it suggests about the future. Aging is not just a medical problem. It is a structural one. It accelerates in environments that deny closure, flexibility, and reinvention. It slows when lives allow movement, endings, and renewal. The resolution is both hopeful and challenging. It suggests that longevity may be influenced less by how carefully we manage our bodies, and more by how freely we are allowed to change our lives. Systems that permit exit may be as powerful as any intervention. Cultures that normalize endings may quietly extend health. Aging backward does not mean becoming young again. It means shedding unnecessary strain, letting systems reset, allowing repair to finally exceed damage. This generation did not beat time. They stopped fighting it constantly. And in doing so, they revealed a truth modern science is only beginning to accept. Sometimes, the body ages fastest not because of what we endure, but because of what we are never allowed to leave behind.